Hi, we are students from the University of Michigan-Flint, and we are going to be talking about how climate change affects bird species. So what is climate change? Climate change is the long-term shifts in weather patterns and temperatures caused by the burning of fossil fuels, such as coal, oil, and natural gases. When they are burned, CO2 is released into the atmosphere and causes temperatures to increase. What does this mean? Well, as the average temperature of the Earth increases, it will continue to get warmer with more severe storms and longer drought in between. And even though it might take centuries, eventually this will lead to the melting of the polar ice caps, which will put most coastal cities underwater. How does this affect birds? Well, birds are very fine-tuned into their environment. In order for a bird to be successful, its physiology, behavior, and genetics all have to match the environment. And there are unique characteristics about the environment they have to adapt to, such as temperature, weather, and seasons. So when these fundamental characteristics of their environment change, problems arise. Moving inland causes a lot of new problems for birds. The new habitat means new competition for limited resources, not to mention new predators as well. This then leads to the decrease in population, which will eventually lead to extinction.
Now we will be talking about some of the current research that is taking place and some of the current actions that people are and can be doing. The current research includes looking at the phenologic changes in birds. When we talk about phenology, this means that we are looking at the behaviors of birds that changes with the seasons. And this will include the migration patterns of the birds as well as breeding season. Migration patterns may alter due to the climate conditions, and the breeding season time may change as well as the length, getting longer or smaller depending on how the climate is changing. The population density is also changing in various areas, and this can be due to biotic and abiotic changes. When we talk about biotic, that refers to the biological systems within an environment. So that might be the trees, the plants, the other food that the birds are eating, the insects, whatnot. And abiotic refers to the non-biological systems within an environment. And this might be man-made structures or man-made behaviors. And another aspect of the population density changes would be the species adaptability. So some species are more adaptable than others. Species that are more adaptable may have more stable population densities, whereas species that are less adaptable are going to be more likely to move to different areas. Next, we will talk about the biogeography, which refers to and goes hand in hand with the biotic conditions of an environment. And the niche is the area, the environment in which a bird resides. So these increase or decrease depending on the climate change, and this is more commonly seen in northern regions and is actually more stable in the southern regions. Altitude changes at which birds fly also changes with the climate. So altitude has to do with how high in the air the birds are at, and the reason why this changes is because with the changing weather, the pressure changes as well. So with the pressure changing, the birds may be more comfortable flying at a lower or a higher altitude. More research is looking into genetics. Genetics refers to DNA, which is the biological core of what and how birds are created. Some of the genetics can change due to selection pressures. This has to do with outside sources affecting the mating cycle and the generational production of more birds. So there are some pressures that some birds can survive better than others, and those birds will go and pass along their genes to the next generation. And pathogens are another way that genetics change. So pathogens are those little bugs that make you sick, and this can happen in birds too. Some birds can survive these little bugs. Those birds will go on to pass their genes to further generations, whereas other birds that don't survive, they cannot pass their genes on. Now, some researchers are measuring these changes in two different ways. That has to do with the climate impact indicators, where we are comparing the local climate conditions and the population density against each other, and the community temperature index. This is where we're looking at the local temperature and the local population density. Some current actions that are being done and can still be done include niche conservation, aiding in habitat changes, raising awareness, and building bird-friendly gardens.
Now we'll be discussing the future research and actions. So the statistics show us that 389 North American bird species are vulnerable to extinction. That is 2/3 of species in North America. 314 of these species are predicted to lose more than 50% of their current range by 2080. 188 of these are climate-threatened birds, and 126 of these are climate-endangered birds. And if we look at the picture to the side, this figure is showing us 10 of the tipping point species in North America. So basically, these birds have already lost 50% of their current range and are expected to lose 50% more by 2080. This figure kind of shows the current ranges and the expected range lost with the varying degrees of climate change. So currently 100% of the range is maintained and we're stable, but if we keep increasing by 1.5 degrees Celsius, 2 degrees Celsius, or 3 degrees Celsius, we can see how the area in red is growing and expanding, and birds are losing more and more of their range each year, and by the 3 degrees Celsius, that is about 80% of their range lost. Our goal is to prevent climate change's most devastating effects. So we have 12 years to do this, and it's crucial that we do two things essentially. So we're trying to protect the places that birds need now and in the future, and we're also trying to address the root causes of climate change. Our goal is to achieve net zero carbon emissions before 2050. So some future actions that we can take is that we can put a halt on pouring gases into the air that trap heat and cause global warming. The Audubon Society is helping expand renewable energy to more states. For example, New York has pledged to get 70% of electricity from renewable sources by 2030, and they hope to achieve net zero emissions by 2050, which we talked about as being our main goal on the previous slide. And some of these renewable sources of energy include solar, tidal, and wind energy. South Carolina has also passed a law that encourages investment in solar energy by giving economic incentives to consumers who do so. So it is our responsibility as a nation and even internationally to try to pass these laws and limit our net carbon emissions. So that was our presentation, and I hope you were able to learn a little bit more about climate change and how it affects bird species. Thank you all for listening.